New Orleans Saints fans got to enjoy the signing of Chase Young for almost an entire day before news of an offseason neck injury began to spoil it. But just how serious is that news? We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're going to break down some of the new signings that the New Orleans Saints have brought in to help bolster their depth and rebuild their special teams unit after some losses in those areas. We're going to project what Chase Young's contract structure might look like based on the education that we've gotten from other edge rushers that have signed similar deals. And then to kick us all off, of course, we're going to be taking a look at Chase Young and the offseason neck injury that fans were shocked by within 24 hours of the signing. What does it mean? How serious is it? And why did the New Orleans Saints sign Chase Young anyway? We're going to be breaking down and trying to answer all of those questions on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Saints podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers will get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 if that first bet wins. Head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. All right, so it took less than 24 hours for Saints fans to already be spoiled around, or not for them to be spoiled, not for the fans to be spoiled, but for the news of Chase Young being signed by the New Orleans Saints to kind of spoil itself. Within 24 hours of the signing, we got a report from Adam Schefter. There were some rumors floating around ahead of that. TJ Jones looked to be pretty ahead of it as well, to give him some love as well, much deserved. But then over with Adam Schefter, you get the confirmation of the report that Chase Young is going to be going through neck surgery and that the recovery could go into training camp, but he is expected to be ready for it at the beginning of the season. So the bottom line here is that by the time that we get to September, if Chase Young is on the field and if Chase Young is, getting a sack here and there in September and all that and looks fine and is play, no one's going to remember this. No one's going to talk about this anymore. There's going to be, some conversation about it in September. Well, remember, he had neck surgery in the offseason, blah, 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 everything. So it might take him a little bit longer to come on and all these other things. How, the commentators will discuss it and all these other things. But then it's going to fade away. That's just the reality of the situation, as most things go in the world of sports, in the world of social media, in the world of entertainment. It'll just go away. But it does still beg the question, was this the right decision for the New Orleans Saints? Because what if that's not the case? What if something goes, wrong with the surgery? It is neck surgery, after all. Everybody that's an everydayer here on the show knows that for a long time, I have always been very skittish about back injuries, neck injuries. Those are the two things where I'm like, man, bro, I don't know, fam. Maybe just sit back. But it doesn't seem like it's something that serious. It seems like it's connected to this stinger injury that he had, that Chase Young suffered in his preseason game, caused him to miss the first week of the season, but then play the rest of the year. And he played with that injury throughout the rest of the year. Maybe it didn't necessarily worsen, but certainly it was worse than they thought, if they just thought it was a stinger, and now all of a sudden he's getting surgery. So it begs a couple of questions. The first of which is, why is the surgery just now happening? And I'm sure that people will have sort of their, kind of trauma response of where we've seen this before with the New Orleans Saints and players who are supposed to get surgery, not getting that surgery until it's too late and all these other things. I think that there's a couple of different realities here. According to Adam Schefter's report, teams were aware of the need for this surgery. So it could be that this is just when the surgery was scheduled and when the surgery could happen. I know we'd all love to believe that because these guys are millionaires in some cases and everything like that, that they can just get a doctor's appointment and get a surgery whenever they want to. That's not always the case. In fact, there's some pretty famous stories around all of that. So maybe it's something weird like that, like the particularity of the surgery. It required a certain timeline for whatever reason, whether it be because of availability things, whether it be because of travel things, whether it be because of his own personal life things, whether it be because the injury needed to get to a certain place of rest after the season before it could happen to mitigate risk or minimize risk, whatever. There could be any number of things. The surgery itself could be something that's not too too serious. Not serious, but something that's not so complicated. I mean, you think about like Micah Hyde last year. After the second week, he suffered, it was in 2022. He suffered a neck injury, the Bills safety. And then that neck injury kept him out for the rest of the year. He had surgery in October, but he had like a fusion. He had stuff that was dealing with like herniated discs and all these other things. It was a bigger thing, and it caused him to miss the entirety of 2022 and then be ready for training camp of 2023. And he was fine. But we're talking about almost an entire calendar year, October to July at that point, right? So it makes sense that would be ready. If that same timeline were to be applied to this surgery, he's not playing in 2023, and that's just, or 2024, and that's just simply not expected to be the case. You don't give him that contract unless you expect him to be out on the field. So I think that's your biggest indicator of why maybe this isn't a surgery that's as serious as Micah Hyde's surgery. The other side of that is that you look at Daniel Jones, the quarterback from the New York Giants. He had offseason neck surgery. It was called a non-football neck surgery, but he also had a neck injury earlier in the season in 2022. And so, whatever it is, he was able to be back out on the field, got that surgery during the offseason, was able to be back out on the field to start the season. Then, of course, he had the ACL tear, which ended his season, but obviously those two things not at all connected. So, this is one of those things that feels unfortunate. It's one of those moments that kind of makes you go like, of course this would happen, or of course this would be a thing and whatever. But it's not like it's a new neck surgery that popped up within the 24 hours of him being signed. We're not looking at a Dez Bryant type of a situation where you bring him in for a day and then something catastrophic happens. Teams knew about this before they signed him. Teams were willing to sign him. The Saints did sign him, and they did so with this understanding that this neck surgery was going to be a thing. And so it kind of just indicates to you that they don't think that this is going to be a big deal. So of all the questions that we can ask, I think that the one thing that really stands out is, are the Saints right or are the Saints wrong? And we're not going to know that until he either is or isn't on the field in September. And there could be a number of things that lead to that. Maybe they get in there and then all of a sudden things are worse than they thought, or the surgery leads to something else. You know what I mean? Like there's other kind of things like that. But until we get there, there's no sense in sort of like hoping for the worst, right? What you're hoping for is that the surgery goes in, they go in there, they clean everything up, everything's good, and then he recovers, and then he's ready for, at some point during training camp, which I imagine would be welcome back to the offseason. We're using the ramp up phrase again, a little bit of a ramp up before he actually gets fully started. And then most importantly, he's ready to go week one on the field, rotating with Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson and, Peyton Turner, Tonopasino, Isaiah Foskey, Nico Lalos, whichever one of those guys makes the roster and all of that. So I think that like this is one of those things where it's very easy to overreact with very little information right now. But once all is said and done, we'll be able to look back on this and go, okay, was there reason to overreact? Was there reason to react? I think I understand it. So I would say like there's reason to overreact. Like it all makes sense. And you would look at that and go like, oh, neck surgery, of course. You know what I mean? Like I get it. I get that 100%, everything like that. But to figure out if it's appropriate, we don't know until September. Maybe earlier, right? Depending on preseason, his involvement in preseason training camp, stuff like that. Maybe earlier, but I think September is going to be the real sort of tell at that point. All right, coming up next, I want to continue on the Chase Young train here, but I want to discuss his contract. 1 year, $13 million, but it's not that simple. Let's break down what we think this contract structure might look like as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. All of the things that bring you a winning trophy can also keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your number one and level it up to peak performance, including things from superchargers and roof racks to exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much more. Whether you're looking for speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what it is that you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, the parts are guaranteed to fit the first time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you want at the prices that you need, it's easy for you to turn your car into an MVP and start stacking those W's. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit available only to U.S. customers. All right, family. Turns out we don't have to project the Chase Young contract because we've got the details. And based on everything that we just talked about, this is much, much better for the New Orleans Saints. All right, so we appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. Let me remind you real quick about the MLB season preview, the best you're going to get from Locked On. You can find it tonight at 7 p.m., March 20th at 7 p.m. on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube channel and on the free Fire TV channels app as well. You won't want to miss that. Again, March 20th tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Go and check out that season preview. So let's take a look at what the contract structure is for Chase Young and why the New Orleans Saints, again, hit a contract out of the park. We were just talking about the injury guarantee, or the injury and the neck surgery and all this other stuff for Chase Young. And I mentioned that the contract is fully guaranteed for injury, and that includes for injury. But however, that doesn't seem to be the case. Turns out Josina Anderson's original report is actually a lot more accurate than the following reports that we got in terms of what the contract looks like. It's actually an up to $13 million contract because there are per game roster bonuses for more than half the amount of the contract's value. That is key. So let's take a look at this. This is per Jonathan Jones from over at NFL on CBS, NFL Insider for CBS, tweeting out that the contract includes a base salary. Remember, this is a 1-year, $13 million contract. We know that it's not that simple, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. It is a base salary of just $2.7 million. The contract structure that I was going to propose was one that included $3 million in base salary. So this isn't too far off from there. But let me tell you, my projection, that's the closest I got to being right. Because I was operating under the assumption that this would be a fully guaranteed contract. That is not the case. So we get this $2.7 million base salary being handed to Chase Young. That's fine. That's good. A signing bonus of $1.86 million. Now we're going to start dealing in some funky types of numbers here. You don't really need to remember most of the numbers. I'm just kind of giving you the full structure. So the signing bonus of $1.6 million is one that they could prorate over the course of 5 years. If they were to do that on some quick math, 1.86 over the course of 5 years would just be $372,000 per year. So after this season, if Chase Young ends up signing somewhere else or, doesn't sign and leaves and doesn't get extended, the Saints would only be dealing with about $1.5 million of dead money at that point. That's really, really solid. That's really, really good. It means that you're not in a situation where you're losing $8-9 million on a $10 million signing bonus or something crazy like that. And when I say crazy, I mean my original idea. So then the Saints also gave him a workout bonus of $450,000. Workout bonuses, according to the NFL, are about whether or not a player is able to take part in some of those off-season activities and things like that, OTAs, training camp, stuff like that. So this is also tied to the surgery. He gets that bonus if he's a part of training camp, I imagine is the arrangement, right? So that kind of indicates, again, not only is it $13 million that they gave to him, it's not fully guaranteed. However, they did put a good roster bonus in there, a workout bonus in there to say like, hey, you get this if you're at training camp. So another good move there. Then here's my favorite part. $7.99 million of per game roster bonuses. This is exactly the way I would have done $8 million, but this is exactly the way that I would have built this out if we were talking about and operating under the understanding of not having a fully guaranteed contract, which we now know is not the case. So you'll have to forgive the stuff that I mentioned in the first segment there around like fully guaranteed and all that other stuff. So if you look at 17 games, it's about $470,000 per game. Actually, it is $470,000 per game. Now, remember that an in-game or a per-game roster bonus in the NFL does not mean that you play a certain number of snaps. Doesn't even mean that you touch the field at all. It just means that you are on the active roster, 53-man roster, I believe, not the game day roster. But as long as you're active, then you get that per-game roster bonus. It might be the game day active roster. But in either case, if Chase Young is on the 53-man roster, he's going to be on the game day roster. If he's on the game day roster, then he's going to play, right? Like that's what you would expect from Chase Young. I don't think that you're going to see a situation to where he's on the active roster, but inactive for the game, maybe outside of the first week of the season or something like that. Like if the surgery needs a little bit more time or if recovery needs a little bit more time, something like that, then maybe you could see something in that vein potentially happening. But for the most part, like if he's on the active roster, he's playing. So you're looking at a per game roster bonus in that case, and you only earn that money by being on that active roster. So if he goes to injured reserve, if he has an injury or anything like that, the Saints are effectively, in that case, on the hook for, like if he doesn't play a single game in the season, which I'm not anticipating to be the case. I'm just saying if he doesn't play a single game for the entire season, then he ends up costing the Saints just over $5 million, $5.01 million. And then he gets $470,000 per game after that. So if we wanted to entertain that a little bit, let's say that he's active for 10 games, right? So we're talking another $4.7 million. We're talking about still a less than $10 million deal in that case. Not bad. It's really not bad. And now it kind of colors everything that we discussed around the neck surgery a little bit differently, right? The Saints look a little bit more prepared for that situation than they were originally made out to seem, right? Because the original construct was, oh, they gave him a $13 million contract and he's having neck surgery. That's not the case. This is not a fully guaranteed contract. Now it's fully guaranteed in that every time that he hits the field, he gets that money. Every time that he's on the active roster, he gets that money. Sure, 100%. But it's not fully guaranteed for injury and things like that, which is what we originally thought it was going to be. I mean, that's what I based the whole framework around the first segment on of like, hey, if they're willing to do that, then they must know that the surgery and everything like that what's going on with the surgery is going to be fine. Now, they might still be confident about it, but at least they've safeguarded themselves in this situation. So this is a really outstanding deal for the New Orleans Saints. I might even say a better deal for the New Orleans Saints than it turned out to be for Chase Young. I mean, if he plays all 17 games, fine, fire. Like, that's great for him. Like, it works out. But he's got to stay healthy. And this is another one of those things. This is another one of those motivating factors, right? Everybody loves to talk about Chase Young and effort and all these other things. Well, here's your effort. Here's your mitigation of that, along with your veterans, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, who aren't going to let you slip and everything like that. Like, this is a good structure. The Saints, I think, knocked this one out of the park. Like, I was already... you were probably already excited about the signing in and of itself, and then it kind of got dampered a little bit with the neck surgery news. But now the next day, so look, you got less than 24 hours to enjoy the signing. Then you got less than 24 hours to be upset about the neck surgery thing. Do we get more than 24 hours to enjoy this outstanding contract? I guess we'll figure that part out. But man, no. This was the structure that the Saints needed. This was great. This is great. This is a really, really good contract. I was ready to come in here like, well, you could do this, but the neck surgery, blah, blah, blah. Now I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that at all because the Saints made the right choice on how they structured this deal. $7.99 million of per game roster bonuses on a $13 million contract. That's more than half of that contract being baked into play. I mess with that. Heavy. Horde. All right. Before I get crazy up in here, I appreciate you very much for bearing with me with adjusting like the themes today and stuff like that and all that. But next thing I want to get to is Oli Udoh, Ugo Amadi, the Saints addressing depth and special teams next. Two big needs for the New Orleans Saints, especially with all the departures that they've had. Let's get to those contracts, or not contracts. Let's get to those deals because we don't know the contracts yet. I think they're probably going to be like 1 year minimum deals, but we'll see. But anyway, let's get to the players. Oli Udoh, Ugo Amadi coming up next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. And right now, you can say goodbye to all the bracket busting and all that stuff because FanDuel is going to let you bet on every single game in the tournament. So whether you're betting on the big underdog and a big upset, or maybe you're betting on the favorite, doesn't matter. You're going to be able to find it all at America's #1 sportsbook with FanDuel. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. It's all you got to do. That's $200 that you can then put on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And speaking of, if you want to know, for the women's tournament, LSU second in terms of favorites over at FanDuel, plus 700 to win it all over on the women's side. South Carolina, of course, pacing the way. LSU also second in their region, the Albany 2 region, behind Iowa. So could see some big old matchups throughout March Madness for those LSU Tigers. Make sure you go and check them out. And of course, check out our friends at FanDuel, FanDuel.com/locked-on to bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. You know, the New Orleans Saints might have signed Chase Young, but look, they had some other signings as well. They bring in some guys that you look at, depth, special teams. It kind of is important because of how much the Saints have lost over the course of this offseason. So don't shy away from it's kind of these smaller contracts, these one-year deals and things like that aren't maybe for the biggest names, because these guys are going to be could be major contributors for New Orleans in a couple phases of the game. So I want to break down these signings of Oli Udoh as well as Ugo Amadi as we continue on with today's episode. Don't forget, we are your team every day. We still have a lot to look at in terms of the impact of Chase Young. How does that impact the Marshawn Lattimore bit? How does it change the Saints defense and the way that they approach the defensive side of the football? How does it benefit the secondary? And with all of that, how does that benefit the offense and Derek Carr and all these other guys? I mean, we got a lot to break down for you here all throughout the rest of the offseason. Still here with you 5 days a week. Ain't going nowhere. We'll be right here with you. No offseason here at Locked On Saints. So I want to break down these two signings. I want to start off with the new face in Oli Udoh. So you'll see Oli Udoh. You may also see Oli Udoh as well. Same player. Offensive lineman, formerly of Elon University. Used to do a little bit of track and field, more field than track, but used to do a little bit of track and field in his collegiate days as well. Has played the last couple of seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. And during that time, he had starts and played games at left tackle, and right guard. He feels that he can compete and perform and go out there and potentially even start anywhere when it comes down to where he can potentially have an impact. We spoke to him on Zoom yesterday, and one of the things that he talked about was that he wanted to be able to go somewhere where he might be able to compete. He wanted to be able to go somewhere that was going to be able to utilize his versatility. Obviously, he's familiar with Klint Kubiak. He was a part of that 2021 Minnesota Vikings offense as well. That's one of the reasons why I keep shouting, about the idea of, hey, maybe Dalton Reisner is a good fit. He's got experience with Klint Kubiak. He's got experience with Rick Dennison in Denver and all this other stuff too. So another offensive lineman maybe to keep an eye out on. But for Oli Udoh, he was one of those kind of like RAS guys that we looked at during his draft cycle. I think it was coming out of or into the 2019 season. And he, was just, barely over a 5-second 40-yard dash with at his size at 6'5", 6'4", 220-ish pounds, or 320-ish pounds. That's really, really good for a guy his size. And so being able to do all that, I think that the thing that he really gives you too is another young option on the offensive line that can play in multiple areas. So kind of like James Hurst, but a little bit younger. They had James Hurst kind of take a pay cut this offseason. So we'll see what that ends up indicating in due time. But a guy like Oli Udoh has the ability to be able to come here and compete. And if nothing else, he gives you, even if you're not looking at him as a potential starter, which look, at left tackle, left guard, there's opportunity for competition there, depending upon who else gets added, right? To the Saints draft an offensive tackle in the first round, all these other things. But if nothing else, it gives you quality depth with NFL experience, starting experience, and has the ability to play in multiple spots. And I think that's something that's good. That's good that the New Orleans Saints ended up investing in that, right? Losing Andrus Peat, you kind of lose a little bit of that versatility. Now, I expect that they'll lose Andrus Peat. We'll see what happens in terms of whether or not he actually signs. To my knowledge, at least as I'm recording this, he hasn't signed anywhere, but has gotten to the point where he was at least being hosted by the Tennessee Titans. Yes, that's the most recent thing that we know so far. But I think that a guy like Oli Udoh comes in and he brings you a little bit more in terms of youth, and then also able to move around and things like that. Now, he's coming off of a quad injury that ended his season after just 2 games last year. It happened very early in the season. Everybody knew that the injury had happened and everything. He expects to be out there for OTAs and everything. I asked him about it straight up, coming off the quad injury. How are things in that department now? He said, I'm doing great, ahead of schedule. Looking forward to being out there and competing with guys during OTAs, which would be late May, early June. So nothing really to worry about here when it comes to Oli Udoh's quad injury. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that, at least at this time. We'll see what happens. But but pretty cool. He's a good signing. He was a guy that I really liked in terms of draft evaluation and all that. Good attitude, mild-mannered player, all these other things, but really good motor, really good drive, very strong dude and all that. So excited to see what he's going to be able to do throughout OTAs, training camp, all of that. All right. The other signing was a re-signing, a familiar face returning to the New Orleans Saints, safety, versatile defensive back, Ugo Amadi. Now, both of these guys are going to fall under the depth category, okay? And that's fine. That's okay. But the thing that I like about Ugo Amadi a lot is that he's already got 17 games of play experience in your special teams unit, right? One of the better special teams units in the NFL. And that's not me. That's, special teams rankings that happen every year and all that. I think it's been like top 5 the last 5 years or something crazy like that. Garen Rizzi, Phil Galliano, they've done a great job. Garen Rizzi, of course, being the guy that like kind of pioneers all this. He was a big part of the new kickoff rule and all these other things too. That's being voted on, I think, next weekend, this coming weekend at the owners meeting. But anyway, outside of that, Ugo Amadi, man, look, he's played in the slot for you. He's played in the box as a box safety for you. He's played wide corner for you. Everybody got ripped up during that Los Angeles Rams game. I don't hold anything against them there. Everybody kind of got ripped up in that one, but that played in the slot at least. But he's a depth guy that can come in and help you out there. But I think more importantly too, like he's a core special teamer for you. And think about what the Saints have lost this season. They've lost guys like Lonnie Johnson Jr., who was a big part of their special teams unit when he was healthy. Zach Bond, massive part of their special teams unit. Even a guy like Malcolm Roach was a big part of what they did on special teams as well, whether it's field goal block or whatever. Like he was a big part of that, punt block, whatever. They haven't brought back Jonathan Abram yet, which I'm going to be honest is very surprising to me. But if you don't have him back, then again, that's another depth piece that you lose. So that's where Ugo Amadi can potentially kind of slide in there for you as well as somebody that can help you have the numbers that you need, along with JT Gray, Jordan Howden, and then of course your one known starter at the moment at safety and Tyrann Mathieu. But he also gives you depth at the slot. This could potentially mean that the Saints weren't really enamored with Avonte Maddox. So very excited to see him back. I love the addition of Oli Udoh. We'll see what happens with Chase Young at this point. But obviously things are trending in the right direction there in terms of like guaranteed money. I don't want to say things are trending in the right direction. Let me say that the projection is expected to be positive based upon the contract that he was given. Let's say it that way. So we'll see what else the New Orleans Saints have up their sleeves over the course of the next couple of days. But we're going to keep you up to date with it every single Monday through Friday and then some here on the Locked On Saints podcast. Appreciate you very much for being here and making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On LSU. Get more info on those the LSU Tigers heading into the NCAA tournament. And of course, Zion Williamson and the New Orleans Pelicans went nuts again in Brooklyn. One of the best alley-oops I think I've ever seen. If you want to hear the big response of that from Jake Madison, make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans. Appreciate you, as always, y'all, for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.